Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, more and more states are legalizing human composting after you've died. Now, Pennsylvania isn't quite there yet, but we do have a certified fully green cemetery, and it's right outside of Pittsburgh in Verona. Producer Mallory Falk and I went out for a tour and to learn why, as they put it, green burial is the way to go. It's Wednesday, February 1st. I'm Morgan Moody, and this is CityCast Pittsburgh.
We are at Penn Forest Natural Burial Park. I'm Laura Fessel. I'm the manager of the cemetery.
And I'm Maria St. Clair. I'm the assistant manager.
And we do natural burial.
We meet Laura and Maria outside their office. It's this beautiful wooden cottage, and you can hear the wind chimes in the background. This is the only fully green cemetery in the state. It opened in 2011, and it looks like an open plot of land with just lots of naked trees that are like 3 times as tall as the couple of houses on the property. Really, aside from the signs pointing you towards the burial area versus the parking area, it's pretty unsuspecting. So we go for a little stroll.
It kind of just looks like you're on a walk in a forest, but there's people buried everywhere that we're looking.
So you could be walking right past a grave and not know it. Other times you'll see a mound of dirt, which is indicative of a recent burial. Since we don't use the burial vaults, we just let the dirt settle on top of the grave, and it takes somewhere between 6 months to a year. Grave markers are optional here, so sometimes, you might see a grave marker peeking out from underneath the leaves, and that's how you know someone's there, but not everyone has one.
Is it safe to walk out here? Is there, since there aren't a lot of markers or anything like that, it looks like we're really just like walking past trees. I wouldn't know until you just started putting it out that there's possibly people underneath our feet. Yeah, is it safe to walk, or are there ever areas that you might be, I started to say planning people. Are there ever areas where you're kind of, planning new crops of people that it's off limits to walk?
No, we don't make any of the areas off limits. Anywhere that we do burials are open to the public. I would say just out of maybe, I guess, some safety and respect, maybe not climb on the mounded graves, but once they're leveled off, it's no problem to walk over them. You're not hurting anything.
How much land is this cemetery on?
We have 35 acres, and around 4 or 4.5 are used for burial right now. We're just in our first phase of burial areas, and we can expand into 5 different areas, and we think eventually we'll have probably 15,000 graves, or maybe even more. Back behind the cemetery house back here, there's 10 acres set aside as a wildlife preserve. So that's all that'll really be, and it'll help protect the cemetery land.
It's funny, we're walking around this place where you come once you die, yet there's so much life around the property. Right off the walkway from the burial site, there's a typically lively flower garden where the plants are in their resting season too. Laura says during the warmer months, the garden grows strawberries and raspberries to snack on, and flowers people can pick to leave where their loved ones are buried. There's even a farm just a short walk away with sheep, a donkey, and goats, including one named George Clooney, who actually looks like the actor. He's very handsome for a goat.
They love eating leaves. When people come visit, you just pick up a leaf off the ground and they just love them. Kids love to come here. Sometimes after a burial, we'll bring families over to the farm and to lighten the mood. That's a big part about Penn Forest too, is it's a cemetery, but there's so much life here. It's such a cheery place, and we have the farm with the animals and the flower picking garden with the flowers and the trees, and it's just as much a place for the living as it is for the dead.
I have to say, I didn't think about death once. I kind of forgot while we were touring. The people buried there might not feel the cold, but we definitely did. So we had duck inside the office to learn more about green burials. I don't mean to be a complete dweeb about all of this, but what is, I just avoid it or have avoided it. What is the traditional burial process, and then what is the green burial process? Because I don't know. I just assume after I see people in the casket, that's pretty much the end of the road for me and that person. So I don't know what happens after that.
Green burial is a way of caring for the dead with minimal environmental impact. And so that means that everything that goes in the ground is biodegradable. We don't take any bodies with toxic embalming fluid. We don't use the concrete liners or vaults in the graves, and we don't use big upright markers that have been chipped in. And it also means that you can be buried in our meadow or one of our wooded groves here at Penn Forest. For traditional American burial, the body goes to a funeral home. It's whisked away right away to the funeral home. And then the family doesn't, they don't participate. They don't see what happens with the body. They're removed. For green burial, a family can be a lot more involved. So they can keep the body at home if they want to. Home funerals are legal in Pennsylvania, so they can keep the body at home. They can wash the body and prepare it for burial. They can put it in whatever it's going to be buried in, transport it to the cemetery. They can pallbear. They can lower the body into the grave. They can shovel dirt back into the grave, anywhere from like just a symbolic shovelful to completely backfilling the grave if they want. And whenever families help in this way for green, during a green burial, they find it very cathartic. It's kind of healing.
I guess, why does it matter how you die, or what you choose to do with your body after you die? So
for people who are trying to live an environmentally sustainable life, that matters a lot to them. What we do in our life matters, and how we go out matters too. The cremation rate is rising. More and more people are being cremated because it's cheaper, and it is a little bit less environmentally damaging than conventional burial, but it's not perfect. It does use a lot of energy, and it does release CO2 into the atmosphere. And so green burial, you're not being cremated, you're not being embalmed, you're not putting any toxic chemicals into the ground, you're not releasing any CO2 into the atmosphere. It's just a way of going out without leaving a trace.
Why are more people turning to green burial? Why have they told you that they're turning to green burial?
We've had people tell us that, they're already being environmentally friendly in their life, and so they want environmentally friendly death. That's a pretty popular reason. We also have people that they were hunters and they love the land and want to be buried in the woods. We also have people that just love nature and want to be buried amongst nature. Which is kind of maybe contradictory a little bit, but we've had people who their living was to chop down trees, but they love trees, and they just want to be buried next to the trees, even though they cut them down for a living.
What I hear a lot is like the same quote, I want to be buried under a tree, or I want to become a tree. And we have, the wooded burial areas where you can be buried literally, 5 feet from a tree and be underneath all these trees, and your body can nourish them. And it's like all the hippies that really like that idea.
Be buried under the tree.
Yeah. Oh, and just the practicality of it. I mean, if the person hasn't already checked off all those other boxes, it's generally less expensive, and it just makes sense. It literally just makes sense.
Yeah. People, the embalming process is like really invasive, and we hear more and more people are like, I just don't want that done to my body after I die. This makes more sense to me.
How long has this been an option for people? Because I've never heard of it before. So how long has this been a thing?
So green burial has been the way that it's been, was done forever, actually, until I guess mid 1800s during the Civil War times. And that's when the embalming fluid kind of, as we know it today, began to come into play for burials. It was used in soldiers to get their bodies home, to have burial at home instead of just wherever they died at. And then it just kind of grew from there, and people became more and more removed.
Is it comforting for people to kind of preserve If that's the best word for it, kind of preserve their loved ones, at least in the way that they remember.
I think it actually is for a lot of people. They don't know another way, and they want to see the person looking like how they remember them to be before they say goodbye or as they're saying goodbye. But that's starting to change. We've noticed people, there has been a big increase in interest in green burial and alternative forms of death care.
Yeah, when did that pick up?
So I'll say this, the first green cemetery opened in North Carolina?
I think
Ramsey Creek Preserve, and I think it was 1996. Now we have over 340 green burial certified cemeteries in North America.
And you're still the only one in the state.
We are still the only one in the state, but we do get people that contact us fairly regularly about wanting to open up green cemeteries in Pennsylvania and some of the surrounding states.
I think the younger generation especially, and thanks to social media, is really spreading the word. And I think Laura mentioned the last 3 years. Yeah, it's really booming. It's the younger crowd that typically seems to be more interested in sustainability, and those are the people who are taking care of their elderly, dying loved ones. And it's the younger generation and social media that is really spreading the word.
Hey, CityCast listeners, newsletter editor Francesca DeBecco here. Do you want to get your message out in the Burgh? You should advertise with us. CityCast Pittsburgh reaches the locals who care most about what's going on around town. Our listeners and readers are the dedicated residents who live and breathe all things Steel City. They're looking for new restaurants, attending local events, and proud to be politically and socially engaged. Learn more at citycast.fm/advertise or email us at ads@citycast.fm.
If you don't mind me saying, both of you are pretty young. So, and I don't typically think of younger people working around so much death. So how did both of you get into this?
Well, my story is weird and kind of funny. I have no background in anything cemetery or death care related. I went to art school, and before I got this job, I was working retail at a local aquarium shop, Elmer's Aquarium, for people who are listening probably.
I do remember Elmer's Aquarium.
A lot of
in
people have been there.
Monroeville.
Yeah. So I'd been there for, 7 years, and there was no end in sight. I hated it. I just hated retail. I wanted to get out. I wanted to work with my hands, and I've always loved nature and being outside. And anyway, Pete and Nancy, the owners of the cemetery, came into Elmer's to get fish for their fish tank. And this was in early 2020, right before the pandemic. And Pete had his Penn Forest jacket on, and I saw the logo, and I knew I wanted to be buried there, and I thought it was so cool. And I've always loved cemeteries, and I've always been weirdly fascinated with death, not in a morbid way, but anyway, I was ringing them up after I caught their fish for them for their fish tank, and I said, hey, if you ever need any extra help, let me know. And Pete said, well, we don't really need help right now, which is apparently what he says to everyone, but he said, why don't you come in anyway for an interview? And long story short, I got laid off at Elmer's because of COVID, and I started coming to Penn Forest helping Laura, 1 or 2 days a week, and then it turned into 3 days, and then eventually they adopted me, and I've loved it ever since.
Laura, what about you? How did you get into this?
So I went back to school when I was 31 for environmental studies. And my last semester of school, I did a research project comparing different burial methods. And I learned about green burial and Penn Forest while I was doing that project. And I didn't really think much of it other than, I thought it was really cool and I loved what they were doing here. But I also have a culinary arts degree. And so I was looking for a job in food sustainability. I wasn't having any luck, and one day Penn Forest popped into my head, and I'm like, oh, I would really like to work there. That would be, I love what they're doing. That would be such a cool place to be. So I sent Pete my resume. He's like, I think I could start you at 10 hours a week. And I'm like, all right, I can do that, and it just, slowly increased my hours over time, and now I'm the manager.
Since this is the Green Burial, if you spend most of your life here in Pennsylvania, do you want to be buried here?
Yeah, I do.
I guess, how does it feel knowing that you're working at the place where eventually it's going to be, your resting place, your final resting place?
I think it's comforting. It's something that I don't have to fret over. I know that I'll be buried here, and I feel good about that. I love it here. It's such a beautiful, peaceful place, and I feel happy here, so.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's awesome. Sometimes when I'm outside, in one of the wooded burial areas, laying out a grave for someone, I think, hey, I could be buried like 5 feet right here where I'm standing, and I think it's cool.
Most of us are not, as fortunate to work in a place that's as peaceful as this. So I'm sure a lot of us would, that would be terrible if I died during a podcast in my closet. Are there people who are like weirded out by this at all? Because death in our culture can be a little bit uncomfortable.
I mean, I remember one person I took on a tour. And we were walking around talking about it. He'd never heard of green burial before until he came here, and he said, do you ever have like hands sticking up out of the graves because there's no like burial vault and there's no casket? And I was like, no, our graves are 4 feet deep, and the dirt is mounded on top, and I don't know. So when people come here for tours, it's because they want this. They already know about it. They're already interested in sustainability. They love nature. It's very rare that I've encountered someone that's really weirded out by it.
What about people with different religious backgrounds? Are you able to accommodate that as well?
Yeah, we are. We are open to whoever would like to be buried here, no matter your religion or beliefs. We try to be accommodating for everybody. We've had some Baha'i people buried here, and they have to be facing east whenever they're buried. And so if we have to like turn them a certain way in the grave so that they're facing east, we'll do that. We have a Jewish burial area that the land has been blessed by a rabbi to accommodate the people that are of Jewish faith but don't have maybe a synagogue that they belong to, such that they could be buried at a cemetery near the synagogue, so they can be buried here in consecrated land still. And we've had Catholic priests bless graves before burials so that those people were buried in consecrated ground as well.
There was one burial that I always think of. It was so beautiful. It was a Muslim burial, and the mother and father were refugees from Afghanistan, and it was for their stillborn baby, unfortunately. But it was this tiny little grave, and the father, with green burial, you can be as involved as you want. And the father, he took off his shoes, and he got in that grave, and I guess they do this thing where they mix some water with the dirt to create mud, and he put some rocks strategically placed inside the grave, and in a way it was really beautiful. And then he completely filled the grave himself with a shovel, and then he put more rocks on top, and they did their blessing, and it was really great. It was beautiful.
Is this a process that you have to, or you should have planned out? Death is can be untimely for anyone, but is this something that you have to have planned out in order to be buried here?
You don't have to, but it is so great to plan ahead. It's easier for the people left behind if you pre-plan. And most people, maybe I shouldn't say most, but a lot of people do pre-plan. We have about a little over 500, maybe 540 something people who have pre-reserved lots, and they know they're getting exactly what they want. Some people have stood right here and said, this is where my lot is. I want this exact spot. This is what I want. And then they're ready to go.
Laura and Maria, thank you so much for showing us a green way to die.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
A little more wintry, outdoorsy news before you go. An extremely rare cosmic snowball will be passing through the night skies tonight through tomorrow. The green comet last passed the Earth 50,000 years ago during the Ice Age. You might remember that. Given favorable weather conditions, Pittsburgh Magazine reports the best places to see it near the city are Observatory Hill in Riverview Park and Ohio Powell State Park. And the Pittsburgh rivers can be beautiful, especially during the winter when the ice begins to form. It's beautiful, but it is dangerous. If ice jams on the river, it can act like a dam and create flooding. We've all seen that, and we all remember that. That's why the National Weather Service in Pittsburgh is looking for volunteers to keep an eye out on the ice. We'll drop a link in our show notes if you want to get involved. That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. It's the first day of Black History Month. Hooray for that. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Pittsburgh newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city, so we'll see you then. Oh, there's goats. There's the goats. I don't like goats, but I'm gonna push through my childhood fears.